But anyway, I'd like to crown Eric Bischoff because now we've come to the first episode of Who Killed WCW.
Wait, well, that wasn't the first episode?
No, that was what happened before the first episode picks up.
Oh.
And we gave Bischoff's basic history in the thing, which they set that up. And they also introduced a number of other players. I never met Brad Siegel. If Brad Siegel was one of the executives at the period of time that I was there, then he wasn't around the wrestling much. But I think I would have disliked him most of all. Tiny Tim. He looks and sounds like the illegitimate son of Truman Capote. And he makes no secret of the fact that he didn't like wrestling, didn't want it on this. He thought that he had made TNT. It's a big hoity-toity station and didn't want it to be tarnished with the wrestling. Was TNT ever thought of as goddamn Masterpiece Theater or public broadcasting or some kind of high-prestige fucking muckety-muck operation, Brian?
It certainly wasn't to me, but I think all these networks kind of see themselves that way. Like USA Network, same thing. I think they always saw themselves as being above the fray. And it's like, no,
yeah,
you got wrestling and the Cartoon Express. Shut up.
Yeah. And they had Janie Engel. It was good to see her. Janie was the long-suffering wrestling secretary. Anytime they had employees that had caused problems or had bad attitudes or people didn't like them, in Turner, they made him a secretary in the wrestling office, but she was the one that actually had experience, knew about the wrestling business and that we dealt with. And she's a wonderful person. And Kevin Sullivan, who, as I mentioned a minute ago, he could have and probably did provide some background on the first 5 years, but, you know, they didn't have the time. But yeah, I would have beat the shit out of Brad Siegel, I think, because and felt pretty good about my chances going into it from the looks of him. And then they had the comptroller who said that he was flat out told it was career suicide if he helped WCW in terms of the bookkeeping or helping them make money or look good or whatever, because they didn't like that they had the wrestling company, and if you tried to help them, they would be mad at you. But also, even with the mismanagement at the top of everybody that they put in charge, even when somebody knew what the fuck they were doing, a la Bill Watts, they still, at that point, it had poisoned their minds on the wrestling company in general. And with this kind of attitude from the top, I wonder why they weren't doing well against Vince McMahon. So again, Bischoff as a motivator, when he comes in there with his line of shit, well, we can do this and that, at least he opened up some of those doors where they actually started trying again.
The biggest problem doesn't seem to be at the top. The biggest problem was the top being Ted Turner dictating that wrestling will always be there, and the executives under him, his top executives, all hating it.
Yeah.
And even though there's an edict that Ted wants it, they still don't want to help it. That's telling too.
And then every time there'd be some kind of major fuck up with the wrestling company, those people got more and more ammunition, and they were derailed for a couple of years when they accidentally started making all that fucking money and they couldn't do what they wanted to do and say what they wanted to say. And as soon as 2000 hit and they were losing their fucking shirt, that's when they piled on with a vengeance. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. And yeah, I knew this was going to be another program where they blew the NWO, but goddamn, the NWO did not fucking discover the polio vaccine and etc. There's a lot more stories to tell, both in why WCW was over and why it went under. But Eric Bischoff was part of the NWO, so he's got to get that in there.
Well, no, I actually think the NWO was pretty huge.
It was pretty huge, but my God, we've heard it. It's on everything. A margarine commercial, up pops and the NWO made margarine.
But no, but the way you're saying it, you're making it sound like the NWO. I mean, again, the popularity increase in '96.
Yes.
A lot of it could be attributed directly to the NWO angle.
Yes. But God damn it, it's everywhere.
They were over.
They were over. And, and that's another thing. How do you manage to fuck that up? They'll do it.
Creative control for Hulk Hogan. It seemed like everyone was pointing the finger at that if they weren't pointing the finger at Bischoff.
Well, but remember, Hulk Hogan's creative control didn't have anything to do with it. They had 45 people in 2 different groups of the NWO before it was over with. Everybody from soup to nuts was NWO something, and the ridiculous booking and etc. They mentioned the Disney tapings as a great idea of Bischoff's. They were universally hated by the fans. They were impossible to tape blocks of program like that and have your stories make any sense with the TBS program being taped every week. And it was a goddamn disaster. It looked like a game show. Am I misremembering this?
Well, it kind of misrepresented it too. Unless you want to make the argument that the relationship with Disney indirectly led Eric Bischoff to being near Hulk Hogan's taping of Thunder in Paradise. So it's a positive because of that, or just the relationship building between Disney and WCW, I don't know. Other than that, it was a syndicated show taping that they did months at a time.
Yeah.
Revealing all the finishes and title changes at a time where that still kind of mattered.
Yeah, or sometimes the ones that they had planned to do that didn't actually happen, which was even worse.
Yeah, when Dennis sued because he was a member of the NWA or whatever it was, and they had a big issue with the NWA title. I think it was one of the times, but those were syndicated tapings in front of almost like fake fans. I mean, they were real people, but they were told who to boo and who to cheer.
They had signs, cheer and boo.
It was like a part of the tour at Disney. So again, for exposure and for any positives that came out of it, it's one thing, but those were unwatchable television shows, and they aired in New York like 2 a.m. Again, it was syndicated. It wasn't like it replaced a TBS show. He made it sound like they replaced a TBS show with these tapings. They never aired any of these on TBS.
Yeah. But anyway, I guess basically then the story's been told many times when Bischoff gets the meeting with Turner and the executives at the time, and he blurts out, well, we got to be competitive. We got to be head to head. Well, then, and he's telling the story because that's part of his charm, his self-deprecating humor. Then he's like, I got to figure out how to make this work. I don't know. I blurted this out. It is true, but, at that point, they start the Nitro, Monday Nitro and Monday Night Raw, head-to-head battle, etc. And Brad Siegel, as I mentioned, second coming of Truman Capote, lightened up on wrestling a little because he wanted to beat, they were competitive with USA, and they wanted to do anything to beat USA. But then he's the same guy that said later on when Bischoff was trying to do that, he said, well, Eric had a maniacal desire to be number 1 and beat the WWF. Well, you just said the same thing about USA, right? But then they got into this is starting to foreshadow the beginning of the long malingering end. The Sting and Hogan angle. The Bischoff said, I heard that Vince planned out a year in advance. Well, why can't we do that? And Vince used to plan WrestleMania main events a year in advance, but he never kept half of that match in the fucking rafters of the arena for a year without letting them do anything. But they milked that for a year, and that was good. I guess that was the biggest pay-per-view WCW ever did, right? With Starrcade 97, Sting and Hogan?
I believe so. It could have been Goldberg and Hogan, but they gave it away on free TV.
Well, yeah. But it could have been after this fucking match, because that's the point of the story, this series. After this match, maybe no pay-per-view was ever going to be that big again because they botched it. And the story's been out there, but you hear Bischoff somehow saying it like it excuses what they did and there was a justification or a reason for it. But he admits that Sting was going to go over clean and beat Hulk Hogan and triumph for WCW. And then the NWO is going to come back and get some heat some other kind of way. And then he says, well, during the day, the finish got convoluted. And he won't come out and say that Hogan came in and changed everything. At one point, he said, well, the fast count came in, and then Bret Hart as referee. And of course, Bret's saying that Bischoff insisted it would be great. And then later on, Bischoff made the comment that, well, it was apparent to Hulk and I that Sting wasn't nearly as excited about this opportunity. Something was off. And so Hulk said to him, to Bischoff, said, not today, his head's not right. Not today, his head's not right. So we're going to change what we've been building a year for and kill the fucking top babyface.
And by the way, just asking you, is that their way of saying that Sting was fucked up still at that time?
No, because later on, Bischoff says again, he thinks that Sting thought that Hogan was going to, he didn't use the word double cross, but maybe pull the rug out from under him, change things at the last minute. And so he came in with that attitude and manifested it. No, he knew what was going to happen. He predicted it. It fucking happened. When they called him in the room with Hogan, he said, well, here's where he changes the finish. And guess what he did? He changed the fucking finish. What do you expect Sting to be? Sunshine, lollipops, rainbows, and waterfalls? Oh, thank you, Hulk. He probably had a sour attitude because it was, well, I knew this was coming. Sting's not a guy that argues. He's not confrontational. But if you blatantly fucking slap him in the face with something, and remember they've said before, well, Sting didn't have a tan or he didn't look like he was in shape. They've come up with every goddamn weaselly explanation to, instead of saying flat out, Hogan did this whole thing and then decided he didn't want to do the fucking job. And Bischoff, because he was swinging on Hogan's fucking dick for the whole run of this thing, backed him up even though he knew it was bullshit. And they killed they killed Starrcade, they killed Sting, they killed Bret Hart his first night in, the highest priced wrestler they'd ever fucking hired, except for Hogan, who got paid every time somebody took a shit in the bathroom. And while everybody else is blaming Hogan and to some extent Eric for this major debacle that set them on the road to ruin, Bischoff won't come out and say, yeah, fucking Hogan, in hindsight, I should have never let him get by with it. He did it, whatever the fuck. He can't come out now. And even, what's Hogan going to do for him now? Push him around the retirement home? He can't come out now and say, yeah, the fucking egotistical lying son of a bitch fucked us all. But yeah, so Starrcade 97, that was fun. And they never, they obviously 98 and part of 99 was still huge, but that was their peak on pay-per-view because people lost faith. And then when, 2-3 months later, they've got Mike Tyson and Austin in the WWE. That's when Kevin Sullivan had told Kevin Nash, yeah, you feel the water, brother? It's getting cold. They're fixing to hit the iceberg. Because Kevin could see these things always from months out, but he was a wrestling guy and everybody else was smarter.
Plus he managed Oz, so they had that history together.
Well, true.
Wasn't Kevin like one of the characters on the stage? Am I remembering?
Yes, right? he was, and he wasn't the monkey. I think it was a real monkey. But he was I think he was a wizened old crone with a walking stick or something. But so at the end of this episode, everybody's blaming Bischoff for being Hulk's stooge and puppet. And while there obviously is many elements of truth in that. It is an oversimplification because there's going to be a lot more factors at play. They still have to hire some more really incompetent people, make some truly ridiculous, fucking stupid decisions, and come up with some really rotten creative before they can put this thing to bed once and for all. But over three weeks of the next 3 Tuesdays, I bet they're going to do it. Blame-a-palooza 24, folks. Who killed WCW? I say everybody.
So you didn't say anything about Dwayne Johnson being all over this thing for no good reason. And if you watch
I forgot.
And if you watch the free video on YouTube, every commercial break is brought to you by Dwayne Johnson and Danny Garcia. Like that name fucking matters.
Well, I was about to say, I understand why they'd say, you know, so-and-so is brought to you by Frank Sinatra or some name that people recognize, but I don't know why they would also credit a fucking mid-card wrestler in AEW, Danny Garcia, for people know who he is.
Well, it's a little ridiculous that his ex-wife.
But and also the Rock lent his thoughts and his inside knowledge of things that happened when he was in high school in a place that his family or he, neither one, were at. But he's got thoughts and he wants to share them with. And if he's writing the checks, it's like Gordon Scazzari was on his program too. Whoever's writing the checks gets to make comments.
Was he writing the checks? Is Dwayne Johnson funding this project? Is that what his production actually entails? Is that what it entails?
If it's Dwayne, doesn't the producer pay for the production?
There are all sorts of producers. That's the point. There are all sorts of
Well, maybe it's Max Bialystock and he's got some old women lined up. You ever think about that?
Is Vice producing this as well? Are the Dark Side guys producers?
Well, they are co-creators, I'll have you know.
Are they producers?
Well, they're probably producing too, because they often produce. So maybe everybody's paying for it.
Is Hiram a producer?
You know, there's another Garcia.
Is the Piss Boy a producer?
Hold on. There's another Garcia in the credits that I caught, but they go by so quick I couldn't fucking tell exactly, but it wasn't Hiram. It was another. Maybe Hiram is his nickname, or maybe there's another Garcia involved. I think Gerwitz is getting the piss. He's taking the piss. He's bringing the piss and taking the piss.
Enjoying the piss.
He's enjoying the warm feeling of the piss.
The Dark Side guys told me that when they filmed Dwayne Johnson off camera, Gorch is just like dousing piss all over himself. Just like,
They did not tell you that.
They told me that there's a B-roll footage making the rounds. Gorch just drinking lots of piss and just bathing in it almost.
Oh, piss boy.
Rubbing it into his skin.
Is that why he has that yellow pallor to him?
For the record, this is all not true.
We don't know.
There is no video.
That's the thing. We're speculating at best. I mean, there's no way to tell these things for sure. But
it seems likely. It
seems likely, but it's not something that we can say with 100% certainty to where we could be taken into court on it. All right, is it time to go to court yet and finish this program?
I guess so. That's the end of episode 1. I guess we'll see where we go with episode 2. But like you said, I mean, now that you brought it up, a lot of things just not mentioned. Like you think about 1990 and all the mistakes made in just 1990. Ole Anderson as Booker. I guess it's really, like you said, it's an Eric Bischoff story, this episode.
Well, I mean, George Scott as Booker in 1989 was a mistake that was followed the Jim Herd mistake, then the George Scott mistake. And when's the last time a guy got fucking 10 weeks as Booker before they said, fuck you, get the fuck out of here?
Yeah, so really you trace it all back in a way. Talking about the Bookers, you trace it all back to Dusty taking the spike right after the sale to Turner.
Right, well... And see, I was the first one to get juice on TBS after Turner bought the thing, right, with the Paul Lee deal. And that's what it does. Is I said, a little juice, kid, but nobody said anything because there was no negative feedback from fans or whatever the fuck. But then they had specifically told Dusty no blood and something else in the way of violence, and the next week he turns the Road Warriors heel, which didn't work. They didn't want to cheer or boo the Road Warriors. by getting juice when they stab him in the eye with a metal spike. And that's why they say, all right, because he was trying to do a really hot angle and hot shot business for the new owners, but he hot shotted himself out of a job because they, oh, fuck you. They didn't realize that, well, who's going to do it? And they had nobody. And Jimmy Crockett did it for 6 weeks until Larry Matuszek was talked to at one time and turned it down. Herd didn't know what the fuck was going on. He got George Scott back because George Scott had been successful in the Carolinas 10 years previously. And then we all know what happened with George Scott. Then they fire him so quickly that they did, well, fuck it, a committee. And there's Jim Ross and there's Eddie Gilbert and there's Kevin Sullivan and there's other people and Jim Barnett and Jim Herd. And that lasted 3 or 4 months until Flair put his foot down and said, fuck this, it's getting worse. And then he became the booker. And it's 6 months, and by God, as we've mentioned many times, and I've proven factually with the records, he got the TV ratings back, and he got the matches and the roster at the best it was for the first 5 or 6 years of their ownership. And he got the pay-per-views back. And then Herd ran him off. And then you got another committee. And then you got Ole. And then you got fucking, I was gone, and a mixture of people from there. It was incessant, the constant change and interference. And nobody could prosper in that environment. You're making me mad all over again, Brian.
Well, I'm sorry there. Just imagine Jim Herd's hair and make yourself feel better.
How about imagine his hair on fire? That would make me feel better. Folks, I'm going to go and tickle my own taint to the thought of Jim Herd bursting into flames.